Hey guys, Graham here again. Here we are, middle of some winter trails, and I just thought I would take you along on a little bit of a fat biking trip. And this is basically going to give you a little bit of idea of what fat biking is like, and hopefully this is going to dispel some of the sort of ideas that people have that aren't actually accurate about fat biking, especially when we're doing it in these sort of winter wonderland conditions. So we'll dispel some myths there, talk about some technique, take you along. To start with, I'll show you quickly the bike that I'm on, and then we can get riding. So this is it. This is my 2020, I don't know what they call this, a 2020 or 2021 Rocky Mountain Blizzard 50. So this for the 2020 or 21, I don't know what year this thing is. Must be called a 21. This was the top of the line alloy version. It's got a carbon fiber fork, quite a progressive geometry for a fat bike. That's going to be a little bit of a discussion that we'll have while we're riding. It's got a Shimano XT rear derailleur on there with the 1051 XT cassette, some Sun Ringling mule foot, I think they're 80mm or 85mm wide rims. We have these Terrain Cake Eater tires, which I have screwed a bunch of Chinese grip stub style studs into the holes where you would usually be putting your pop-in grip studs. I thought it was a genius idea, but it's turned out to be a little bit of a pain in the ass. The tires are set up tubeless. Because I screwed in those studs, you sometimes end up screwing through the casing, and so going tubeless is your only way to be sure that you're not going to end up with the end of a stud going through your tire. The brakes on here are the MT420 Shimano brakes. They're a pretty basic brake, but for this sort of use on a fat bike, they are more than enough. You don't have to worry about brakes that dissipate your heat easily or any of that sort of stuff, because we're out in the cold. Rocky Mountain handlebars. You can see my setup with a Night Rider light and my Garmin on there. These are the Bar Mitts Extreme. These things allow me to ride in my usual gloves and to still have full dexterity, and I can feel my controls and everything. Toe peak bottle cage, water bottle, race face Affect cranks, these Deity pedals, like I said, a carbon fiber fork, and that's pretty much the highlight tour of, oh, it's got a race face Affect dropper post on there too. So this is one case where a more simple dropper post is often better than a fancier one, because there are some posts that really don't like to operate properly in the cold. So that's the bike that I'm on. We'll take you for a little bit of a ride and talk about the bike and talk about some fat bike misconceptions, some ideas about fat biking, even about geometries and stuff. So if you've been interested in learning about fat biking, this might be a video that is useful for you. I will stand here and take in the sun for a moment, and then we'll get going on this beautiful lap. So today we're riding at the Canmore Nordic Center. You can hear from the tire noise that we're into sort of hard packed conditions here. I suspect we'll maybe see some ice in some spots, but this is sort of one of the many prime conditions that you'll get on a fat bike. Especially in our part of the world, riding with studs is a pretty sort of common thing. Almost everybody ends up doing it. It's sort of required so that you can actually get out for a ride and not be terrified of what might be around the next corner if there's going to be ice. There are some cases where ice is still quite scary on a fat bike, but this removes a lot of the areas that you can still easily ride through. So I would say the first misconception then, using this trail as an example right now, is that somehow fat bikes are designed to be able to ride on soft, fresh powder. Ideal conditions, I would say, for fat bike are something in the medium to firm packed, and then up to these sorts of conditions. And it's not a case of floating on powder, but in those softer packed conditions, it does mean that the load gets spread out enough that you're, give me a second to get up this quick little steep climb here. So just enough that you're spreading out your weight and not sort of digging a rut into the soft stuff. These trails that we're riding on are actually groomed, so they basically have a machine that will come out, and after a fresh snow, basically it'll end up causing a defined trail, help you find out where you have to go, so you can see the trail, and then typically firm enough that you can actually ride. However, after grooming, you do often have cases where the trail has to set up a bit to get the most out of, or to actually get the speed and be able to get some traction. So misconception number one out of the way. This is not a powder bike. Going out on powder days means hoping for getting there after a groomer has gone through. Another thing would be, people think these bikes are horrendously heavy and horrendously slow. Weight-wise, quite typical. A bike like mine is going to be about 31 pounds. So that's lighter than a lot of full suspensions that you would spend more than this as a fat bike. Still a weight that, yeah, it doesn't cause any issues. Another thing that surprises people is the importance of tire pressure and running your tires really in PSI ratings that pretty much shock a lot of people. I'm running 6 PSI in the front right now, 7 in the rear, and I tend to ride my tires on the harder end of the sort of range compared to a lot of people. There are people riding pressures on those days you really need to get a ton of traction, usually on snow that isn't consolidated, so it's kind of like riding on like sugar on top of hard packed. People will ride down to about 3.5 PSI. I'm personally not a fan of that, because if you do end up someplace that you can corner hard, you're that likely then to cause an issue of tearing a tire off the rim, pinch flatting if you get into some rocks or anything, which in some areas can still be poking through. My two favorite things about riding fat bikes are A, getting a chance to actually ride outdoors in the winter. I'm not a person who has any kind of patience for riding a trainer indoors. I ride bikes because I absolutely love it, not because I'm some A-type personality who's trying to get their max heart rate 1 beat faster or something. For me, this is all about the sensation and the experience of being outdoors. So that would be one thing. The other is riding in the winter on trails like these can be some of the best skills training that you will have. By that I mean you get really pronounced feedback if you are putting your weight in the wrong place on either climbs, descents, or corners. So at, say, 10 or 12 kilometers an hour, which is at least a safer speed to crash at, if you're not weighting the front wheel properly in some corners, well, your front wheel's going to wash out the same way your enduro bike would on a corner using the wrong technique at 30 kilometers an hour. But that's going to cause an injury. In this case here, 9 times out of 10, you're laughing if you crash. So really, really good for skill development. And as I was talking about the fitness and stuff, not being a person who does the trainer, I still think you actually end up with a better workout in many cases than being on a trainer, because you got this psychological thing that you might blow yourself up way harder than you would on a trainer to just make it up that last 10 feet of a climb. So it helps you to really max yourself out while you're not even thinking that you're getting a workout. You're just thrilled because you made it up a tricky climb or something. As you can see, a lot of branches down here. There has been a lot of warm winds out this way in Canmore, Alberta. So that's why we're seeing so many pine needles and stuff on the trail. And why the trails are, I wouldn't call them icy, but they're definitely on that kind of firm pact caused by traffic on warm days kind of conditions. Now, one thing we're always reminding new fat bikers of is that fat biking is absolutely a condition-based sport. Yeah, a little bit about your condition as an athlete, but mostly about the condition of the trails. You will get to learn from sort of watching the weather what to expect a little bit. And if you're in an area anything like ours, you start to anticipate after some weather has rolled through which trails are probably going to be worse and which will actually improve no matter what kind of conditions are happening. So don't just assume, oh, I've got a fat bike, I'm going to go do my usual trail. It should be good. That trail might be good. It might also just be horrendously terrible, and something 10 minutes away might actually be riding really, really well. So it is a rare case where social media, Facebook, that sort of stuff can be really, really useful if you can get on some sort of a trail report, sort of a group. You'll often get up to the minute beta on where the trails are running best. So don't just go ride your same summer trails, and pay attention to conditions. So this little corner here, this brings up a technique thing to talk about. Where on a mountain bike, you're really used to pulling your weight down towards your handlebars on a climb to get your weight over your thighs to generate power. The thing you're gonna find yourself having to do on a fat bike is actually leaning back on a climb as far as you can before you actually start to wheelie, to help your back tire to dig in as much as possible. So that is a weird technique that until riding a fat bike, I'd never had to use that on a mountain bike. But since then, I think I have come across a couple instances in really weird, wacky summer conditions where having that as a technique in the back of my brain becomes a really useful mountain biking thing. So you got the cornering, that weird climbing technique that you can bring into riding your mountain bike. Two things that the fat bike teaches you that you may very well not ever have enough repetition on a mountain bike for it to just become second nature. Now, one thing that's a shame on the GoPro effect is that as we're going through the corners here, especially on this particular bike, you're having to be quite conscious of leaning onto your hands, so feeling your triceps holding you up to make sure that that front wheel isn't going to wash out on you. And a fat bike is a tremendous tool for reinforcing that that is how we get the most out of these modern geometry mountain bikes or fat bikes. So we're really lucky out here to have a few distinct zones for fat biking in this region of Alberta. Almost all winter long, until it gets to the temperatures where you're just too wimpy to get out, which for me is usually -12 to -15. I think I'd rather just do some work at home. But warmer than that, when you have a bunch of different regions, there's always somewhere to go in the winter, and you'll get some version of excitement. So that's one of the neat things with fat biking, is the conditions are way more variable that you're going to ride in. So you're going to have some days where the snow is actually running super fast, super grippy. You can almost ride faster than summer conditions. And other days you're going to be swearing a lot because it's virtually unrideable. But a lot of things in between where it's going to test some skill set that you never knew you had to work on. So here I am, leaning back a little bit in this climb again to get that rear wheel traction. As I showing you the bike, I'm on flat pedals, and a fat bike, as another point of discussion here, is really, really good to teach you how smoothly you can pedal on flat pedals. You'll have climbs that are really, really tricky, and you can't be surging your power, and a lot of myths about being clipped in and how important it is to pedaling smoothness or efficiency are basically dispelled, I would say, on a fat bike with flat pedals. And that is a skill that transfers over so well into summer as well. So we are now on the Odyssey descent. This isn't a steep descent, but it's about the steepness that works really, really well on a fat bike, and it's also probably going to show off some features that you get on a descending trail, which, like this rut that we're in here, wherever you have people who do rear wheel skidding, you will end up developing a pretty good rut. And that is probably the thing that those beginner or intermediate riders who are new to fat biking probably hate the most. And then once you learn to embrace the rut, it's a feature that you kind of look forward to. A, because it's such a ridiculous challenge in some cases, but it can also turn into your own personal 3-inch high berm in some cases. Now, one trick on the ruts that's really important is on descending ruts. Concentrate on weighting your front wheel and not worrying so much about your rear wheel. Lower your chest so your elbows are out, and it gives you a lot more chance to do sort of side to side bike wiggles to stay in the rut but still keep your balance. And then when you're climbing, you'll switch that up and you'll actually be trying to concentrate on your back tire being in the rut. So, not sure if you can tell with the weird angles that the bars make in some cases in these ruts, but you do end up with some unusual counter steering movements where you're leaning the bike one way but turning your bars the other. I honestly don't know if that actually pays off in the summer, but I think anything that just teaches you to think outside the box, it forces you to develop something as far as new skills. So, and here, weighting the front tire a lot. The rear tire is basically kind of in drift mode, but your front tire just gets locked into the rut. Now one thing you'll find on a fat bike is you have days where you totally feel on. Every rut is your best friend. It's helping you to ride faster, and you will have days where it feels like every time you enter a rut, you've already kind of started with a little bit of a lean, and you're constantly putting a foot out because you're trapped in a rut, but your weight isn't centered on it. So that's kind of one of the neat things on a fat bike then, is you have to focus so much at every moment. It's really, if you're struggling with things, go ride a fat bike, because you won't have the mental power to struggle and keep your bike upright. Must have been a crazy storm through here with all these trees down. We did hear reports of winds up to about 150 kilometers an hour, so that is about 90-mile-an-hour winds. So I think all these trees confirms that those crazy winds certainly did make their way out here to Canmore. I could hear the chainsaws going as I was riding the one section back there, so there's cleanup crews trying to get this all riding well. Here we have those ruts, so weight the front wheel, concentrate on that. Bike body separation, concentrate on that. Let your back end drift, but do not push your body weight back because you're cautious. You are just guaranteeing yourself that you're going to have a front wheel washout if that's your technique, and that is a huge takeaway for summer riding. being overly cautious gives you a negative feedback loop. Being confident, weighting your front wheel, just keeps you getting more confident, weighting your front wheel more, and that means more speed while maintaining traction. Huge lesson for summer riding. This is a section of trail I have not ridden in the winter, so this will be interesting. It gets steeper than anything we've been on. I expect we're going to see ruts. We're also lower in elevation, and you can already hear the icy nature of the trail. So now, I mentioned a bit of the idea of talking about geometry on this bike. I think spec on this thing is wicked. I'm still a little undecided on geometry. I came from riding a giant Yukon, which was a bike that had the most or the least exciting geometry chart I've seen, yet the bike blew me away with how it rode, which upon that it taught me that what works for geometry on a summer bike and a winter bike are two very different beasts. So I personally think Rocky probably went a step too far on this bike, taking inspiration from, whoop, sneak through it, half down tree, taking inspiration from a summer bike and thinking that that was going to translate well on a fat bike. There will be some riders who, depending on conditions, their skill, may ride aggressively enough that they actually kind of get benefit from this new Blizzard geometry. But I don't know how many of those riders are out there, and how often the conditions would set up where you actually then get a benefit. I'm just getting to the point now where I'm actually getting used to what is required on here, and it's a very pronounced conscious decision to put the weight over the handlebars on those corners in descending and stuff like that. So if you wanted a bike that would force you into a new style of riding so you could ride an enduro bike even better, this might be it. If you want a bike that you don't have to be quite as on the ball, I'm really a fan of what Giant did, even though their geometry chart on the Yukon, like I say, I was really not stoked at all when I saw the chart, thinking I knew better than them, and then after riding the bike I was kind of like, well, Giant outsmarted me, even if their engineers in Taiwan have never even ridden on snow. They somehow anticipated geometry better than a lot of other companies. So these are the kind of conditions here where the Rocky is actually, it's in its element here. Whoa! And I was almost face first in the snow there. So yeah, if you're aggressive, want to ride fast, look at the Rocky Blizzard geometry. That might be something that's going to work for you. If you're not as aggressive, looking for a fat bike more for just getting out for a ride, not for shredding the laps, bro, then something like the Giant Yukon may be a little bit of a wiser choice for you. Hey guys, just editing this video and I just realized one thing that I forgot to talk to you about, and that is on fat bikes, pay a lot of attention to the quality of the rear hub. The Blizzard that I'm riding in this video has a DT Swiss 350 rear hub. If you are somebody who's going to ride quite a bit or has fairly powerful legs, pay attention to the quality of the rear hubs. It's still a little bit of a mystery in the bike world why it is that rear hubs on fat bikes blow up so much. Some theories about how much traction they have, or just the fact that you have such a wide rear end on fat bikes that there is some extra flex to the bikes, which basically helps to really amplify issues with free hub quality. But it is an issue that we've seen with a lot of customers who ride a lot, that they end up blowing up non-top of the line rear hubs. So that's your one little thing then, just to keep in mind. Pay attention to that. It's the reason that you see a DT 350 rear hub on a $3,000 Rocky Mountain fat bike, whereas in the mountain bike world you wouldn't see a DT hub of that quality until you spend $7,000 or $8,000. So that is why. And lastly, let me know, what do you think? Do you like this format for riding and talking about bikes like this? We're running to the end of a lot of the new 2021 bikes that are coming in, so just looking for new ways to keep content coming and to keep it interesting for you. So let me know your thoughts, or if there is anything that you would like to see in a bike shop's videos that would be helpful to you. Otherwise, thanks for checking in. We'll let you see just a last minute of riding one of my favorite sections on the fat bike, and otherwise we'll see you on the next bike. Okay, thanks.